Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here tonight. I'm Kim Conniff-Tabor. I am the editorial director of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, which is organizing these talks tonight in association with the New York Times. These are the Art for Tomorrow talks. And tonight we're very pleased to welcome a group of students and alumni from the Virginia Commonwealth University School of the Arts, or VCU Arts, which is here in Doha. At the Democracy and Culture Foundation, we are committed to listening to and to learning from young people who are bringing fresh ideas to their work, to their activism, and to their art. And we're very excited to be engaging in a conversation with them here tonight. We'll start with a session on rethinking youth and culture in Doha. That will be led by Matt Anderson, who is the European culture editor of the New York Times. And this will be followed by a dynamic session on the future of Arabic typography, moderated by Farah Nayeri. She's a culture correspondent for the Times. And here we're going to learn how young designers are experimenting with and modernizing and promoting this ancient script. So please also join us tomorrow. We'll have an afternoon of sessions with amazing speakers like Kamel Minour, Massimiliano Gioni, Sheikh Karim, Alif Shafak. And then on Sunday, there will be a conversation between Her Excellency Sheikh Mayasa and Jeff Koons. So now I will hand it over to Matt Anderson.
Thanks, Kim, for that introduction. And welcome everyone to the Art for Tomorrow talks. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be talking about how the future will be shaped by these unprecedented times that we're living in, and how a whole range of forces, social, political, technological, affect the kind of art that gets made and how it gets presented and who gets to experience it. But perhaps more importantly, or at least more generally relevant, we'll also be looking at how art can actually shape the future, so that it doesn't just passively represent what's going on around us, but it actually takes an active role in determining what the coming years are going to be like. And so when the program for these talks came out, I was thrilled that the first session of them is going to be a session with young artists and art world players here in Doha, because they're going to be the people who are going to have to create that future. And really, everything that we talk about over the coming days, they're the people who are going to be most affected by that. And I think this is unfolding at a pretty unprecedented historic moment. We're in the midst of a history-altering pandemic, which has touched the lives of everyone on the planet, and which has changed everything for us. I think when people look back, write the history books of this moment, they'll also talk about reckonings with inequality, which are taking place all around the world, whether that's racial inequality, the forms of Black Lives Matter movement, gender in terms of Me Too, and also sharply rising economic inequality everywhere, which particularly younger generations are pushing back on. Then, of course, there's a spectre of climate change, and then the way in which technology is changing everything about how we live our lives and how we relate to each other. So I think that it's great that this discussion with young people is happening here in Qatar, which in the scheme of the art world, Qatar is like a young person. It's a young upstart. If you think back 20 years ago, Qatar was not on the map in the global art world. Well, now it's home to world-class museums. It's got an enviable collection of contemporary art, and that's all been the result of pretty stratospheric investment from the Qatari state into making that happen here. And also arts education is a huge part of that as well. And all of our panelists tonight have been beneficiaries of that investment and that system. So I'm going to be joined by Habib Abu Fatim. He is from the auction house El Bahi here in Qatar. Noor El Bassouni, a multidisciplinary artist, a graduate of the Virginia Commonwealth University, now doing postgraduate studies in law. Eche Oyamayit, who is studying at the moment in the painting and printmaking department at VCU. and Hassan Al-Sahi, who's also studying there in the multidisciplinary arts department. So, I hope in my setup that I didn't make it all sound too daunting or too frightening, the situation in which you all as young people and as artists are going to be working. And maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe that's not the way that you think about it. Maybe we could start with you, Noor. Do you have an idea of yourself as a young person and as an artist working at the moment at a time when the stakes are really high?
I think the art market in Qatar has changed and evolved in a way that kind of allows space for young artists to explore, but it's still developing, so to an extent it is growing up to, it is definitely meeting international standards slowly, and it is there is a lot of really interesting artists emerging. The way I make art, or the way I create in general, is a very personal process, and it's slowly getting integrated into the art scene in Qatar, and it is slowly I'm sorry, I'm slightly nervous, yeah.
In your practice, are you interested in those big themes about how we're going to live tomorrow, how things are changing around us? Are those things that you want to grapple with in what you're creating?
Definitely. I'm aware of the impact that the artworks I make have on the art market in Qatar. I'm aware of the impact it has on the global market, or to the regional market at least. And I am careful about the ideas I present and how I frame them, and what kind of issues to tackle specifically, because I know that a lot of things need to be addressed, because it's a fresh market, and there is different things that create a great pathway for artists to go in. So I'm exploring themes of gender and gender inequality. There is kind of gender roles or performative gender. I'm exploring themes of spirituality as well in my artworks, and just how to frame that whole culture, how to frame culture in general in my work. Yeah.
Eje, in your art, do you also want to engage with social themes, or do you feel as an artist that you have some responsibility to do that?
Honestly, as an artist, I tend to create more personal artworks, but as a person, there are so many times I woke up and I'm like, I want to be an advocate for these issues, and I always have high goals of being an outspoken person and tackling everything that I've always wanted to tackle. I mean, I've always wanted to be on a TED Talk, but that's like a completely different thing. And I don't know if that's gonna happen, but hopefully. But in my art, it's more personal, it's more for me, and I think there are two kinds of arts, or maybe three. There's commissioned artworks for others, and there's personal, and then there's these ones where you have serious issues that you're tackling through it.
But even in making a personal artwork, do you feel that that is connected with these larger things about inequality or about gender relations? Do you feel that they affect the work that you produce?
I think because it's personal, definitely. I mean, I face a lot of gender inequality situations in my life, and there are a lot of tragedies that occur and a lot of things as well that I'm exposed to. I think in that sense, yes, I do tackle these issues, but in a very under the rug kind of way. It's not too out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got two artists who like to concentrate on the personal. What about in your art? Would you say that it's more grounded in your personal experience, or that it's more dealing with wider societal themes?
I feel like it's more like personal, but some people can relate to. For example, I'm talking about emotions, and how they're like a taboo topic to be talking about in public, and how like it's kind of self-centered for the person, but we don't really kind of express it out there. So probably like, let's say half of the population is dealing with whatever problems I'm dealing with, so of course some people are going to be able to relate to what I'm doing right now. So yeah.
So you work at an auction house that distributes, or at which contemporary Arab art from the region is sold. How typical would you say of what we've heard from the three artists here, that approach of focusing on the personal and avoiding big, more overtly political statements, how typical do you think that is of the art that young people are making in the region right now?
Well, you know, we, as an auction house, we're like sort of in the midst, in the crossroads of all the other key players in the art scene, the art world, artists, galleries, dealers, collectors, enthusiasts, and everything. So we usually we try to be as holistic as possible and try not to have any agendas. But Qatar is a very interesting context, right? And so somehow, and you know, Al-Bahi Auction House is one of the first local auction houses in the region, and so we're not basing our model on any traditional Western auction houses. It's a completely new model. So we've sort of taken it onto ourselves to start exploring a little bit of what, you know, we've heard these artists speak about. We're open to, you know, accepting you know, contemporary art, modern contemporary art that speak about, you know, all the themes, but we're also always trying to push the boundaries. We're always trying to see within this, like, you know, local regional context, what is it that we can talk about? What is it that we can put forth as art? And, you know, it's a very young country, especially like, you know, the art scene and the art market is very young. And so yeah, I mean, I would say that we are somehow conscious about that. We're always trying to put there and try to understand. And I think in Qatar, in general, even with Qatar museums, for example, I remember with the Zidane sculpture, you know, when they first put up the headbutt, there was a lot of conversation around it, and that, you know, that gave us an idea about, like, you know, how people perceive art. And then when Damien Hirst's sculpture, which was in front of the Sidr Hospital, when it was unveiled, there was a lot of, you know, talk about it on Twitter, online, and, you know, and I think it's important that that happens, you know, that kind of, maybe backlash would be a strong word, but it's important for us to keep doing that as art institutions and, you know, art marketplaces to understand where are we now? Like we're at a different place than we were 5 years ago. So yeah.
I can see some of the other panelists nodding, remembering that Damien Hirst sculpture that was presented. And talking about a debate, how would you characterize what different groups in society said in relation to that sculpture? Eji?
Sure if I'm ready to answer that question just yet.
No,
there was a reaction to it because of how representational it was, and in a conservative religious.
It was a statue of a pregnant woman, wasn't it?
A baby, and like the process of the baby growing inside a womb, basically. Yeah.
And so how did that go down in Qatar? How did different groups in society perceive that?
Because it was representational. Religiously, there's some debate about having representational sculptures being put up in public. So it created a little bit of a backlash because it was very new to the community here. People reacted to it because it's perceived as religiously incorrect to some, yeah.
And it's negotiating with those kind of, I mean, in the West, that would not have been a controversial thing to present in an artwork. So you as artists having to present work within that context, knowing that it can be taken in a bad way, can provoke negative reactions and virulent debate. Does that have an effect on what it is that you decide that you will bring forward? Eja, I see you're noting.
Yeah, I definitely think that every artist has to think twice about what they're going to present. once they're around, or once they enter someone else's place, you know, someone else's respective homeland, you have to respect their culture, you have to respect their religion. So I do think that there is a fine line between the things that you create for yourself and the kinds of things that you can present to the world. And there's definitely some of that over here, yeah.
This is slowly starting to relax slightly though, because depending on the way you frame things or the way you represent it, the community in general is starting to change slowly with time. So it's not as rigid as it used to be 10 years ago, or when the Damien Hirst sculpture first got presented.
Sam, do you?
I kind of agree with what you say. It's like we're still kind of, let's say, developing as like our overview of like what a sculpture is and like what a statue is. I feel like it's still like, let's say, a bit sensitive. Like to this day, my mother would be like, don't draw like a human figure or something. Like it kind of encapsulates like a life or something. So I feel like since, as she said, from a religious like perspective, it's kind of difficult, but I feel like we're kind of now more understanding of like what is art and what's like, let's say, a religious figure. So I feel it's gonna like take time for us, like, let's say, to understand, like, especially with the new generation, we're like more open to art and let's say more westernized. So we kind of understand like the difference and we could accept the differences.
I mean, you, in your work in the international art trade, you would see how what happens here in Qatar fits into a broader picture. Would you agree that that things here are changing, becoming more Western, or more like you might see in other regions outside of the Middle East?
Well, I have strong opinions about that because I understand where you're coming from when you say that things, we sort of somehow say that development means becoming more Western, or developing means becoming more, or becoming more modern, or something becomes,
well, that wasn't quite what I said, but just in terms of the acceptance of presenting things which in the West would be uncontroversial, which all the panelists said were controversial and did cause distress to some of the people who saw them.
Right. Yeah. My view on that. And I'm sorry. I mean, I think what I meant to say was I agree with what Noor said and what the other panelists said in this regard, that it's important how we frame things. I personally think that it's not exactly controversial for the subject. Of course it is, maybe a little bit, right? But I think it is how it is framed. I think it is the shock factor that, makes people talk, and like, you're putting something in front of them that, especially in terms of art, for example, when Qatar Museums, for example, started first putting art shows, started bringing Damien Hirst, everything. I mean, can you imagine one of the first big international artists that was exhibited over here after Murakami and so forth was Damien Hirst. And you walk into the show and there's his, very famous, renowned, sculpture of the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. And you can imagine for somebody who's been born and brought up in Qatar, or like, for an Arab person to walk in and be introduced to contemporary art as that. It's a shock. And the same thing was, I think, for the Zidane headbutt sculpture and the Damien Hirst sculpture as well. And so I think if it was framed maybe in a less shocking manner, maybe we could have had, conversations around it, and like, maybe it could have been accepted a little bit more easily. So it's important as art institutions in our marketplaces how we frame things, how we put it in front of the public, to understand, like, or to understand what conversation are we even ready to have. I think so.
For a second and say, I mean, it's not necessarily here in this culture. Anywhere you present any work, there will be someone that has a bias about what you present. I mean, there are so many issues around the world that can be tackled, and a lot of things that people could be offended by that we're not aware of yet. And I think, I mean, just because of the Damien Hirst sculpture, it's tackled towards specifically a culture-based bias. I suppose you can call it a bias, but I think you'd find that anywhere. It's not just here in Qatar. I mean, yeah.
Of course, yeah, I think that's definitely a very valid point. What I was trying to get to is I wanted to get some sense of how free you feel as artists to put forward the ideas that you that you want to deal with. Whether you feel that any statement that a legitimate artistic statement that you wanted to make as an artist, whether you could do that. Is that something you feel that you could?
I feel like every person has his own limitations. Like I cannot just like kind of go like and open up just and do whatever I want. Like at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to like kind of think about the place that I'm gonna basically present my art in, like the culture that's in, like let's say in Doha. So I feel like yes, we are free, but to a certain extent. Like I cannot present anything and everything. Like I'm gonna have to be aware of the message that I'm trying to send, and basically the pictorials that's basically, let's say, on my painting. Like, is that gonna suit the age range that I'm gonna present it to, and the location that the people I'm gonna present it to? So yes, we are free, but everything has its own limits.
Nuaz, a lot of the work that you produce deals with the issue of gender and men and women's positions in society. When I was doing some research for this, I had a look at the World Economic Forum Gender Gap report, and it said that of the 156 nations that it ranked, Qatar was at number 142, so that's pretty low in those rankings. And I wondered how, as a woman who deals with those issues in this society, what are some of the constraints that you find on what you can do, and how do you overcome them?
Although my work is personal, I'm usually addressing issues that are very common and society-wide. So the way I think about the problem, or the way I frame it, the way I deal with any issue that I tackle or represent in my work, just comes from really deep awareness of the perception it gives of how people will react to it and what kind of ideas I'm trying to represent. So being really careful and really conscientious, basically, about the subject matter and about what I'm doing. I don't mind the shock factor, and I don't mind the reaction and everything. But I do understand that it comes from somewhere, definitely. The reaction to the artworks comes from, has a lot of history to it, and it's definitely going to be shocking at first instance.
And the sale of a recent work of yours did cause some controversy, didn't it? Why don't you tell us about that?
There was people who were very delighted to see that type of subject represented, and then there were people that were kind of offended by it, but that is very...
Could you tell us a bit about the work itself to start with?
The painting that was on display that you were referring to is a portrait of 5 men sitting in a domestic setting, and they're sewing, and it's considered women's work historically, and it's kind of putting them in this intimate position that people. It's not. I mean, it's a very conservative looking painting, to be honest. But people perceive it differently because of just the social constructs and what is deemed to be acceptable from each gender, and how they're framed and what kind of work they're allowed to perform and stuff. So representing gender in that way, or one of the genders putting them in a position where they're doing something they're not supposed to do socially, created some conversations about it, which was, I think, is a great start.
Yeah. I'm interested in when you're making art here, who's your public? Who are you doing it for? Do you make art, do you think, for people of your own age and in your social milieu, or do you think that, or do you hope that it will be seen and understood more widely? Ege?
every artist's hope is for their work to be seen by others. But I mean, the work that I create, since it's more personal, it's the only person that I really consider understanding is myself first. And then if there are, I mean, when I'm presenting my work, I try to allow the others to interpret their own interpretations of my work first. And then I get to explaining, like that part comes next, because you find it remarkable how people can see a completely different story once they look at your work and than what you initially had in mind. And that's, I think, the answer that I can.
I know a lot of young people these days are thinking a lot about the climate. So we've just seen at COP26 in Glasgow, huge youth movements getting out to protest there and to have their voice heard. And a lot of the leading voices advocating for new policies in the climate, the young voices, the Greta Thunberg, tons of other younger activists are doing that. And I wonder, perhaps it's not something that you think about directly in the work that you're producing, but a lot of art is not terribly environmentally friendly. It produces waste, people fly to see it, and I wonder if as young people you think about the climate in the art that you're producing. No?
It's not very easy, to be honest, to keep the climate in mind while you're producing work, because I am aware of the waste it creates and everything. But it is definitely, just as a painter, which is one of the main things that I work with, it is important I keep in mind just the recycling of the materials themselves so that nothing goes to waste. I don't really, I'm aware of the type of chemicals that I'm using and what I'm applying to my canvases, etc. The art world in general, I understand where you're coming from, asking about the climate when it comes to that. And it is something that I keep in mind, but I feel like it's more relevant to maybe artworks that have to, could you do my... Yeah, environmental art, exactly, yeah.
Well, people confuse that a lot, I think so. There's, I mean, that's one of the things, like, art world is usually very late in catching up with, what's going on in the world and everything of that sort, and being, environmental friendly, eco-friendly, and being sustainable is something that only very recently these conversations have started, coming up. And again, this is not to get confused with environmental art. Environmental art has been around for a very long time, like spiral jetting and everything. But art materials are extremely toxic. They produce insane amount of waste. And art materials from paint to canvas to, and then, for institutions, that's for artists, but even for institutions, the daily practice of packaging work, moving back and forth, it produces a lot of waste. And so I think it's important for artists and institutions and marketplaces around the world to start talking about that and understanding what is it that we can do, what is it in our capacity that we can contribute to. And of course that doesn't mean that all artists start using sustainable paint and everything, and because the materiality is an important aspect of the work itself. It might even completely change what you're talking about, and that's not to say they should do that. But for example, at Al-Afifi, over the last couple of years, we've been very conscious about reusing all the packaging material over the last 4 or 5 years. We try to do that, and we get a lot of these comments and criticism that it's not industry standard, and it comes off at maybe slightly tacky, but we're signing up for it, and we're talking about it to people, and we're telling them, well, why is it that we do that? So yeah, I think it's really important that we do that.
Art is usually a very isolated process a lot of the time. So having the artists become aware about issues like that, especially that it's newly introduced to the region since the art market is growing. Because it's an individual process and it's kind of isolated, it's not very often that you would see collectives working together, etc. So the awareness of the climate impact the art world has to stem from individuals that are kind of separate. And it's slowly getting there. Yeah.
Hassan, is it something that you're thinking about? You use a lot of different materials in your practice, resin. Are you thinking about the environmental impact of those when you're selecting them?
I try not to be as wasteful as possible. I try to like kind of use the scrap materials that I have around, not throw them, recycle them. But it's kind of hard to change your material based on the climate because the market doesn't have many options. Let's say like environmentally friendly options, or like the best are like, let's say the toxic ones. Let's be honest. So I just try to be aware of what I'm doing, save not throw away the scrap pieces, reuse them. But it's hard to kind of change your materials based on the environment because like you're pretty limited with whatever you can do.
So when it was at the start of the discussion, we were talking about that there's a discussion amongst young people, and it's taking place in a young art market here in Qatar, and the art market has been created from the top down. Really, it's been decisions of the state and investments of the state that have created the institutions, have given you guys the educational opportunities, and it's let a scene flourish. But I wonder how it moves on to the next stage, because it can't always just come from the top. How much do you feel that there's an independent scene in Qatar that's growing, that's independent from the decisions of ministries or governments or people in charge? Maybe Habib, you'd like to say that one.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have to acknowledge that, like I said before, the art market in Qatar was like, it's very new, it's only starting. And the way, because there are only very few key players in the art market over here, I think the way we operate is very different from, other, like traditional art markets out there. The way it works in Qatar is that there is no outside pressure, there is no governmental pressure, it's not coming from the top down, because we were starting it from the scratch, like very few like galleries and places like Al-Afifi auction house, we were we had the complete freedom and opportunity to be able to devise it and model it as how we thought it was fit. And in that process we were able to break a couple of molds, where this idea that, and I think we also came at a really good time. There was like big changes happening in the art market, which usually doesn't happen.
You're a pretty rare player, aren't you? There's not many others doing the same thing as you are.
I think so. I won't say within the region, and even internationally, there are some people that are doing it, but perhaps maybe not at the scale that we're doing it, and maybe not as openly as we're doing it, because the art market doesn't change a lot. There's always been important key players that have always controlled what goes in, what artists sell well, who is the next, who's the hot shot, and things like that. Whereas, here, the way we were able to do it was that we were able to completely, there is no primary market, secondary market, or anything of that sort. We were, sort of in between all of it, like a very, we can call it the democratization of the art market in a way. And that's something that's happening around the world because of COVID. So the art world has always had to wait for things like, a market crash or a pandemic for changes to happen. But I think that's good. And we've caught up to it already. We're already kind of out there.
In terms of presenting more online, making things more...
Well, not just that. For example, we don't necessarily focus on secondary, works that are already in the secondary art market. We are dabbling with also the primary art market, which is very, it's not something that auction houses have done before. But in the pandemic, what happened was they changed completely. and they started like, starting to get work, because usually that was something reserved for galleries. But auction houses are starting to do that as well. That's one model that we have been. That's one mold that we've been able to break. But it's also the categories and how often you have these, auctions and online auctions. Obviously, selling online, doing online sales, and so forth. These are things. Yeah, that's basically what we've been doing, and I think we're kind of like at the forefront of it within the region, at least. I think so.
Ej, do you feel that the art scene in Qatar has been changed as a result of the pandemic? So obviously it has for the auction houses, but in terms of you as a practicing artist, have you felt an effect from?
Definitely. I think I'm seeing a lot more technology out there. I mean, I'm not much for technology. I don't know how to use it, but others, I've seen so many experimental works, and there has been so many exhibitions since the pandemic of people trying to show what they've procured over the time frame that everyone was under lockdown. And I think it really gave some people who are able to use this type of advanced technology, it has given them a wider range of things that they can show to the world. And yeah, but personally, I don't know if my art has developed in that sense. Yeah.
But I think I'm kind of interested to say, like, I don't really know that much about technology, because I always think of people your age are sort of constantly glued to the screen of the phone and much more up on anything high tech than I would be. But you have no interest in that at all. But do you think that's untypical for your generation, or do you think that that's maybe?
It's definitely not common. I don't know if you're familiar with the term old soul. I kind of feel that I am that, and I don't know if that has anything to do with my connection to technology, but it's never been my calling. Like, I never felt really connected to technology. So as much as I can, I tend to stay away. Yeah.
It also, technology also, whether or not you use it in your art practice or not, but it also opens up a whole world of possibilities to you in terms of finding out about what's going on elsewhere in the art world. You can read about it online, you can see things much better now. Through the pandemic, there have been a lot of technologies that have been developed for ways that you can present art to people if they can't be present, because no one could go into museums or galleries for so long. And it obviously opens up all of those kind of possibilities for you. I'd be interested to hear from all of you how you use that technology, how you use the online world as a way to keep abreast of things that are happening outside of Qatar in the rest of the world. Are you looking online for inspiration and for trying to keep up with what's happening elsewhere? No?
Going back to the point that Habib was making about the democratization of the art market, a lot of independent galleries have appeared online during the pandemic, and a lot of artists started showing their work online, and it kind of changed the way the art is presented. But in terms of technology being an inspiration, there's definitely, it opens up windows and it opens up pathways for artists to explore things that are completely outside of their range of vision usually. Inspiration that comes from other artists online and collaborations that are usually would be unlikely to happen are happening because of technology now. The way that algorithms work as well on social media and apps, etc., they really have an effect, I feel, on the art that's being produced, what kind of ideas we're constantly subjected to.
How so? How do you see that happening?
Well, now there's apps like TikTok, for example, or Instagram, and they have algorithms that are set, and the majority of the people, or many of the people on Instagram or other apps, they are content creators. They're constantly looking at content, and the content that they're viewing brings more of that. So it kind of creates like a cluster. So it's almost like we're creating an alternative reality, just by viewing more. So the technology is learning what we're liking, and it's giving it back to us, and it's just a constant cycle.
And you feel that has an effect on what you as an artist are producing?
Well, it definitely brings the collective concerns to light through what we're viewing and through what people are talking about. So it has an impact on how how artists are thinking about things or how they're producing work, because it's not just an isolated process anymore. It's not just your own thoughts in your own dark room anymore. It's very different, and people are sharing their concerns. There's a lot more information. There's more than ever, I think. They're coming up to the surface.
It also gives you, though, a huge platform on which you can reach people if you can, you know, if you can crack what people are into. Are you all using social media as a way to publicize, distribute, or even as a home for your artworks, Hassan?
I feel like definitely, like now we're in the technology age, so everything is either on or taken off social media. Like we have now social media auctions, and we're basically taking inspiration from social media. So I feel like it's definitely been a home for everyone. And I personally don't have my work on social media. I feel it's not ready to be there. But Ejay's work is, for example, is on social media. I've seen like a lot of her work is there. And many more artists, like we have probably like a lot of artists here that have their work on social media. So it's a nice way to kind of catch up with everyone's art and everyone's like new things. So yeah.
Ajay, how important is social media for you as a platform to present your art, but also as something that's shaping it? Do you think?
I think commercially it's very important to allow others to see your work. But personally, I prefer that physical feel to it. Like when a person goes to visit your studio and they're wowed for the first time. That's how I prefer others to see my work. That's why I'm not that present on social media, but I try to be just for the sake of the platform and everything.
You have to be.
I feel like there is an expectation, honestly, that I have to be as a youth as well and to represent the youth. But I try. I do my best. Yeah.
I think we've probably got time for one or two questions, if we have any from the audience.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to see young artists now in Qatar talking about art in depth. And this is really makes me very proud. And like you said, 20 years ago, we would not have had this ages talking about art and the kind of conversation and the depth you're going through. So thank you for being good artists and good speakers. I just have maybe a question for all of you, but maybe one sentence answer, but if you can. We know the government and the semi-government, like the Qatar Museum Authority and Qatar Foundation and the likes of those, are really doing a lot to enhance art and to help introducing art. And I think there's no other, especially in the region, there's no other government that's so interested in promoting and enhancing the art scene and the creative scene in general. But my question to you is that what can the private sector do to help you become better artists or to enhance the art scene in Qatar?
Okay, so I'll start off saying that the way the public sector basically helps us is like, let's say they basically project our work out there. Like now we have our work on the stadiums, we have them on basically the streets. So basically they're everywhere. So it's like we're able to share them with everyone that passes by. Like if you're on the street, probably everyone that drives a car. We now have 2022, so everyone's going to the museum. So basically they're accessible to everyone. So I feel like that's the best way to kind of help us.
I I think personally, because of my lack of presence on social media, it's very difficult for me to find like that accessibility. So maybe to find a way to make that more accessible to people that are not so good at the social media thing. I maybe like posters to advertise the opportunities. That would be amazing. Yeah.
I think providing an alternative to the state-funded initiatives, so having initiatives that are kind of separate, would be really beneficial to the art scene and to artists who are still growing and emerging in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Noor. What the government has done in Qatar is amazing. It's something that you can never find anywhere else. But I think they provided the jump start, they provided the foundation, but I think there needs to be more grassroots initiatives in Qatar. I think artists and the art community and the private sector needs to help them to be able to do that, and that could be in terms of probably like residencies, spaces, shared spaces, more art market opportunities, and gallery spaces, or I think better yet, this is in an ideal world, would be to be able to maybe, I would say, like fund or give them grants where you're able to allow the art community, like thinkers, artists, curators, to come together and like sort of make their own spaces, something that would be organic, and then it goes from there. I think that would be really amazing to see.
Well, thank you for that. I think that was a great question. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for now, but I want to echo your sentiment. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I'm really impressed by the depth and the maturity that you've all brought to this discussion, so thank you very much. We're going to have a 10-minute break now, and then we'll be back with another panel moderated by my colleague Farah Nayeri. Thank you so much.